On a quiet Sunday afternoon near the old church, Daniel, a Marine back from service, found a trembling puppy abandoned beside a deflated ball. He thought it was just a rescue, but that moment drew him into a chain of threats, secrets, and courage. From a gray pickup stalking the streets to a raid on a salvage yard, every step pulled him closer to the truth about the dog's past. What Daniel discovered would change not only the pup's life, but his own. Stay with us until the end, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories. The late Sunday quiet had a way of softening everything. The cracked sidewalks, the vinyl siding, even the chain-link fences that rattled when the wind threaded through them. Daniel walked with a measured pace along Maple and Third Hands deep in his jacket pockets, the afternoon light sliding toward amber. The brick church on the corner had already emptied. The last of the faithful had climbed into sedans with cloth seats and carried home casseroles wrapped in foil. A bell, slow and reluctant, gave a final note that hung above the block like a benediction. Across from the small side lot where the neighborhood kids kicked a ball most evenings, the street had settled into its usual hush, a single lawnmower 2 blocks over, a dog barking, and then deciding against it, the soft scrape of a rake against damp leaves. Daniel's boots found the familiar grit at the curb as he drifted closer to the lot. Yesterday's rain had left shallow puddles that reflected thin pieces of sky. Mud clung to the grass in long brown ribbons. He had passed this place 1,000 times, nodding at parents in folding chairs, tapping a scuffed ball back into play, giving directions to Little League games he no longer remembered attending. Today, the field was empty. The aluminum bleachers bare the bleached white lines from last summer ghosting through the dirt. He noticed it first as a wrongness in the picture, the kind your eye doesn't reason out so much as feel. Near the center, beside a deflated soccer ball that lay like a tired moon, something small was curled against the wet ground. For a moment he thought it was a wadded t-shirt or a bundled grocery bag, the kind that snagged on chain links and fluttered until the wind got bored. But then the bundle shivered. He stopped without thinking. Muscle memory from other open fields tightened his shoulders. His gaze swept the edges, checked for movement, counted exits he didn't need. The small shape trembled again. Daniel stepped off the sidewalk, water lifting around his boots. As he crossed the lot, the smell of damp earth returned a memory he hadn't invited dust and diesel and a canvas cot in a tent that never stayed warm. He blinked it away. The closer he came, the clearer the outline became a puppy, no bigger than his forearm, black and tan mottled, like someone had painted it in a hurry. Mud slicked its belly. Its ribs rose and fell in uneven rhythm. A deflated ball brushed its shoulder as the breeze nudged it. The pup lifted its head when his shadow reached it. 2 dark eyes met his glossy and questioning, as if the world had asked more than once and never waited for an answer. "Hey," he said, the word barely there. He crouched, letting one knee settle into the wet, and not caring that he'd stained jeans he wore for yard work. The pup's ears twitched, but it didn't try to move. He slid one hand out of his pocket palm up the same way you offer trust to a skittish recruit and wait for the shake to steady. A small nose, cool and damp, touched his fingers. He felt the tiniest shiver travel through it into him. "You're all right," he murmured. It wasn't a promise he knew how to keep, not yet, but it felt right to say. Up close, he could see a thin strip of webbing around the puppy's neck, a homemade collar stitched with fishing line. The material was frayed where someone had cut it to size. A small laminated tag hung at the end, the kind a hardware store might print in a pinch. He wiped the mud off with his thumb and read the faded ink, Buddy, followed by a phone number that had bled at the edges until a 6 might have been an 8. He put a hand beneath the puppy's chest and lifted. The weight surprised him so light he had to remind his other hand to come up and steady the hindquarters the way a person remembers to breathe after a shock. The pup gave a breathy sound that wasn't quite a cry and tucked its face against his jacket. Daniel felt an old tenderness expand in his ribs like a door opening on a room he'd closed off years ago. Across the lot, a breeze rattled the bleachers and sent a paper cup skating. He glanced along the fence line, half expecting a parent to wave a child to run back for what they'd forgotten, a pair of teenagers to claim the stray as theirs. There was only the empty angle of sun, the church's brick shoulder, the town holding its breath between weekends. He shifted the pup, freeing his right hand enough to fish out his phone. He typed the number from the tag, carefully double-checking the second-to-last digit where the ink had smudged. The call went straight to a recorded voice that told him the number was no longer in service. He tried swapping the 6 for an 8. The same recorded apology came back patient and indifferent. The pup quivered. He pressed it closer to share warmth through the denim and sighed. "Buddy, huh?" he said softly. "Seems about right." "You find something there, son?" The voice came from behind him, gentle and wheezing around the edges. Daniel turned to see Mr. Lewis, the church's deacon, in a windbreaker zipped to the neck. Daniel had seen him 100 times, carrying folding chairs, straightening hymnals, handing out styrofoam cups of coffee that tasted like fellowship instead of beans. "Found him in the mud," Daniel said. "Collar says buddy. Number's dead." Mr. Lewis took 2 careful steps onto the lot, shoes splaying a little in the damp. He peered at the tag while keeping a respectful distance, eyes crinkling at the edges. "Let me see that," he said, and Daniel angled the tag toward the afternoon light. The deacon's squinted voice softening further. "That looks like Claire's handwriting, the young woman from Mason's Hardware, the one on Oak Street. She writes her 5s like that, straight-backed and stubborn, bless her." He frowned with worry that had nothing to do with rain. "Haven't seen her for a few days. She usually stocks our donation bins on Fridays." "You know her last name?" Daniel asked. "Not sure I ever caught it proper," Mr. Lewis said. "Claire with the brown ponytail and the quick smile is what we call her. She helped fix our folding tables last month with a little elbow grease you wouldn't expect from such a slight thing." He glanced at the puppy, the deflated ball, the whole small, sad arrangement. If she put him down here, she meant for someone to find him. Somebody kind. The thought settled over Daniel with the soft weight of duty he recognized. He nodded once. "I'll keep him warm for now," he said. "If you hear from Claire, will you tell her Daniel Hart has him?" "I'll do that," Mr. Lewis said, pulling his windbreaker tighter against a breeze that had found its way down the side street. "You be good to that little fellow. Lots of heartbreak in this world, but there's plenty of balm if folks share it." He tipped a small salute with 2 fingers and started back toward the church, each step careful on the slick grass. Daniel rose with the puppy tucked against his chest and looked once more across the lot. He could see the afternoon as a series of frames, the deflated ball, the puddle catching a rag of blue, the steeple's shadow reaching like a compass needle, the small pair of eyes that had met his without judgment. He carried Buddy to the sidewalk, the wind lifting the collar's tag so it tapped against his knuckle like a tiny metronome. At the corner, he turned toward his apartment a few blocks away, following the route he knew by streetlight and habit. Buddy's breathing warmed the inside of his jacket. Daniel let his stride settle into something steady and deliberate. He thought about the number gone to nowhere, about a girl named Claire with a straight-backed 5, about a deacon worried without saying so. He thought about how many things in his life had begun not with plans, but with the simplest of interruptions. A voice across a room, a letter forwarded too late, a hand offered where there had been none. He pressed his chin lightly to the top of the puppy's head and felt the damp fur against his throat, an anchor he hadn't known he needed. The town moved around him, the hum of a pickup on the next block, a screen door kissing its frame, the distant call of a train that wouldn't arrive for another hour. He cut through the alley behind the antique store, climbed the 3 shallow steps to his building, and balanced the puppy as he worked the deadbolt with practiced precision. Inside, the hallway smelled of lemon cleaner and old varnish. He ascended to the second floor, the stair tread squeaking exactly where it always did, and unlocked his apartment. The room greeted him with the familiar order of a man who kept things tidy because it helped him keep himself the same way. He found an old towel in the linen closet and spread it near the radiator, then set Buddy down and watched him test the warmth with a paw, then the other before curling into the softness like someone who finally believed a promise. Daniel crouched beside him and ran a careful hand over the small rib cage, counting without counting. "We'll get you checked out in the morning," he said. "We'll figure out Claire." He rose, took the tag to the kitchen window for better light, and copied the number into a notebook he used for grocery lists and things that mattered. He wrote Claire Mason's Hardware beside it, underlining once as if to swear an oath only he would hear. The last of the light slid off the building across the alley and left his walls a kind gray. In the hush, he realized the afternoon had not just given him a problem to solve. It had given him company. He didn't know yet what he was willing to risk for that. He only knew he was already considering it. The morning after he found the puppy, Daniel rose early with the same instinct that had carried him through years of reveille calls. But now it was the sound of soft whimpers that stirred him rather than a bugle. He fixed coffee, slid into his jacket, and carried Buddy wrapped in a towel down the stairs. The pup's head rested just under his chin, its breath dampening the collar of his shirt as though anchoring him in a way no object ever had. He decided to walk the 3 blocks to a small veterinary clinic known for treating strays without fuss. The sign above the door was hand-painted. Its letters faded by weather, but the place smelled of antiseptic and kindness when he stepped inside. A young woman at the desk looked up, recognized the towel bundle, and guided him to a small room with a metal table that clanged softly when he set Buddy down. The veterinarian, a calm man with graying hair and the kind of patience learned from years of coaxing nervous pets, passed a scanner over the pup's neck. A faint beep registered. The vet typed into the computer, eyes narrowing at the screen before speaking carefully. The chip confirmed the puppy's name was Buddy, and the registered owner was Claire from Mason's Hardware, but the file carried a red flag contact restricted protective order in place communication through an advocate organization only. The vet printed the record and slid it across the counter, lowering his voice as though walls could overhear. "There's more here than a simple stray," he said. Daniel thanked him and tucked the paper into his jacket pocket, the weight of responsibility settling deeper on his shoulders. He carried Buddy home with steadier steps than he had the day before, the pup's warmth giving him a strange courage. Inside his apartment, Daniel laid Buddy on the couch with a folded blanket, then sat at the kitchen table and studied the printout. The black ink spelled out official warnings he had never seen attached to an animal's record before. He dialed the number of the listed advocate group, a non-profit operating out of the county shelter. A voicemail picked up the recorded tone, asking him to leave details, and he explained in measured words that he had found Buddy near the church lot and wanted to make sure the owner knew he was safe. He left his name, his phone number, and his willingness to cooperate, then hung up, staring at the silent phone as if it might offer reassurance. The afternoon passed with quiet rhythm. Daniel boiled rice, mixed it with soft food from the corner store, and watched Buddy eat in tiny, careful bites. He found himself smiling at the pup's determination, then frowning at the hollowness in its frame. He brushed mud from its ears with a towel, poured a fresh bowl of water, and set the printout under a magnet on the refrigerator door, thinking it would be safe there until he knew what to do next. Evening came, and the apartment dimmed into amber shadows. Daniel read an old paperback in his chair. Buddy curled at his feet, the radiator ticking like a slow metronome. He checked his phone twice for missed calls, but none came. Around 9, he stood to stretch, thinking he might carry Buddy out for a short walk. Passing the front door, he noticed something wrong. The faint line of light under the frame shifted, as though the door wasn't sitting square. His body moved the way it used to in places where wrongness meant danger. He placed Buddy inside the bedroom, then approached the door carefully. The lock still turned smoothly, but when he opened it, the metal faceplate bore a thin scratch. The mailbox below his unit stood ajar, hinge bent in a way it hadn't been that morning. He knelt, checked inside, and found it empty. Frowning, he returned to the kitchen, pulled the printout from the refrigerator, and froze. The paper was gone. He checked the floor, the table, even the trash can, but it wasn't mislaid. Someone had been in his apartment long enough to remove only that document. Nothing else was touched. Wallet in the bowl by the door, spare keys on the hook books, lined neatly on the shelf, untouched. The violation was precise, intentional. Daniel sat heavily in the chair, listening to the building's silence. Buddy padded out of the bedroom and pressed against his shin, sensing tension without needing words. Daniel stroked the pup's back slowly, his thoughts circling. Whoever wanted that paper cared not about money or valuables, but about the information tying Buddy to Claire. That meant the collar tag wasn't an accident. Someone had intended to erase the line between the pup and the woman who had owned him. He looked at the scratch on the lock again, then at Buddy, who gazed up with wide, dark eyes as if asking what would come next. Daniel leaned down, resting his hand gently on the pup's small shoulder. "We'll keep moving forward," he said softly, though his chest tightened at the thought. In the silence of the apartment, he realized life had changed more in 2 days than it had in 2 years. He didn't know what Claire was running from, but he knew now that someone else was invested in keeping her hidden, and the only thread left in his hands was a puppy that had chosen his floor as its safe place. That night he double-locked the door, slid the chain across, and set Buddy's blanket near his bed rather than the radiator. Sleep came in fitful waves, broken by the memory of the missing paper. He understood in the steady breathing of the small creature beside him that this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something that would test both the quiet life he had built and the loyalty he was learning to give again. The next morning, Daniel walked Buddy back toward the church, the collarless pup trotting with short, determined steps beside him. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and motor oil, and the sidewalk still carried faint chalk marks from children's games that had washed halfway away in the last rain. Daniel kept his eyes moving, scanning windows and corners with the old awareness he could never quite shake. He told himself he was only returning to thank Mr. Lewis for his words the day before, but he knew he wanted something more clarity. Inside the church office, the secretary, a kind woman with a neat stack of files at her elbow, greeted him with polite curiosity when he asked about cameras facing the lot. She excused herself and returned with a flash drive, then led him to a back room where an aging desktop computer hummed softly. Daniel stood behind her chair as she opened the file, the grainy footage coming alive on the screen. The timestamp read late Saturday evening, a little after dusk. The view showed the empty lot, the steeple shadow stretching across it. A figure entered from the left, slight and quick, her ponytail swinging. Daniel recognized the description Mr. Lewis had given Claire, the young woman from Mason's Hardware. She cradled a small bundle in her arms and stepped onto the field. Kneeling, she set the bundle Buddy onto the ground beside the deflated ball. Her movements were gentle, but her head kept turning, scanning the street. She stroked the pup's back once, then straightened sharply, glanced behind her again, and hurried off toward the opposite corner. The camera caught her looking back twice more before disappearing into shadow. Seconds later, headlights flared at the edge of the frame, a gray pickup idling in place, angled toward the curb, as if waiting. The secretary clicked pause and turned to Daniel with worry etched in her features. He thanked her, copied the file to his phone, and walked out into the morning light with Buddy tucked under his arm. The gray truck in the footage had not moved when Claire walked away. Whoever drove it had been waiting with patience that suggested intent, not coincidence. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had spent years reading the difference between accident and design, and this was design. That afternoon, he reached out to Mark, a man he had served with overseas who now wore a police badge in town. They met at a diner with vinyl booths and coffee that never emptied. Buddy rested in a carrier on the seat beside Daniel, his eyes heavy with sleep, but ears twitching at every clatter of dishes. Mark leaned over the phone as Daniel played the footage. His expression changed from casual to focused in seconds. "That's not good," Mark said quietly, then tapped the truck with his finger. "Give me a moment." He stepped outside to call in a favor, pacing the sidewalk with the clipped efficiency of a man still carrying military rhythm in his stride. When he returned, his face was more serious. "That pickup's been logged in a couple of incident reports. Nothing pinned down, but neighbors near Mason's Hardware called in complaints. Same make, same color, circling slow around the block the night before. Claire didn't show up to work." He lowered his voice. "Whoever's in that truck knows her. And they're not just passing by." Daniel absorbed the words in silence, watching Buddy shift in his sleep. The pup's presence steadied him, even as the unease grew. The evidence now linked Claire Buddy and the gray pickup in a way he could not ignore. The footage proved she had left the pup intentionally, and the truck's appearance tied the act to something larger, something circling her life like a predator. Mark sipped his coffee, eyes never leaving Daniel's. "You want me to push this further?" "Officially?" he asked. Daniel thought of the scratched lock on his door, the missing printout, the silence that had settled around Claire's name. He nodded slowly. "Not yet," he said. "Let's just keep eyes open. If they know where she worked, and if they wanted her dog gone, they'll look for him again." Mark studied him a moment, recognizing the steadiness that hadn't changed since deployment. He placed a small card on the table. "My direct line. If anything feels wrong, don't wait." They shook hands, a gesture heavier with history than with words. Daniel carried Buddy home, the afternoon sun sinking behind storefronts. He walked past Mason's Hardware on Oak Street, its windows dark, a closed sign tilted at an angle. Dust had already begun to gather inside as if absence settled quickly. The air smelled faintly of lumber and varnish. He stood a moment longer, Buddy squirming softly in his arms, then turned back toward his apartment. That evening he reviewed the footage again, pausing at the frame where Claire bent to set Buddy down. Her face was tense, but determined, the look of someone making a sacrifice she hated, but believed necessary. Daniel traced the still image with his eyes, then closed the phone with deliberate care. He felt the weight of two truths pressing on him. Claire had left Buddy for safety, and someone in that gray pickup had been watching, waiting for her next move. He sat in the chair by the window, Buddy curling at his feet, as the radiator clicked on and let the darkness of the street settle against the glass. He realized he had stepped into something not of his choosing, but no less binding. The dog was no longer just a foundling. He was a thread connected to a missing woman and a shadow that lingered at the curb. As the first stars appeared above the rooftops, Daniel felt the quiet resolve he had carried into countless uncertain nights. He whispered to the sleeping pup, more to himself than to be heard. "We'll keep looking, Buddy. We'll keep looking." The evening settled in with the weight of autumn, the kind that pressed cool air against windows and sent neighbors inside earlier than usual. Daniel clipped a makeshift leash onto Buddy's collarless neck, looping it gently so the pup would not pull, then stepped into the quiet street. The block was lit by a scattering of street lamps, their halos leaving pockets of shadow where branches swayed. Buddy padded beside him with new confidence, his paws tapping softly against the sidewalk. Daniel let his eyes roam out of habit, scanning alleys and parked cars, hearing the layered sounds of his town at night, the faint hum of a television behind curtains, the thump of bass from a passing sedan, the distant whistle of a train crossing somewhere beyond the river. He turned down Maple toward the schoolyard, the leash slack in his hand when a low rumble approached from behind. He glanced back casually, then caught the shape of a gray pickup, rolling far slower than traffic should, headlights off, moving as if each foot of pavement needed measuring. His chest tightened in recognition. The same truck he had seen in the church footage. He slowed his pace slightly, eyes narrowing to read the reflective shine of its plate. His mind worked the way it once had in convoys, focusing without panic, noting the first 3 characters of the license before the truck eased around a corner and disappeared. He exhaled through his nose, steadying himself, then tugged Buddy gently back toward home. Every step now felt observed, though the street had returned to its ordinary quiet. He reminded himself that fear could cloud precision, but vigilance sharpened it. Inside his building, the stairwell smelled of dust and faint detergent, familiar and unchanged. Yet when he reached his apartment door, something was wrong. The door sat against the frame, not flush, but ajar by less than an inch, just enough to draw the trained eye. He paused, lifted Buddy into his arms, and pressed his ear against the wood. Silence. With one controlled motion, he nudged the door open. The apartment looked as it had that morning, chair angled toward the window lamp, steady on its table blanket folded where Buddy had left it. But as he stepped inside, he noted details. The air felt slightly cooler, as though it had been opened longer than it should have. The rug near the kitchen showed a faint shift, a corner curled under as if by a careless shoe. He set Buddy down, scanning the room with slow precision. The pup trotted a few steps, then darted beneath the wooden chair, curling tight in the shadows, eyes wide. Daniel followed the line of sight, moving to the counter where he had left the printed sheet from the vet alongside the improvised collar. The paper was already gone, stolen 2 nights earlier. Now the collar itself was missing. He checked the floor, the shelves, the small bin beneath the counter, but it was not misplaced. It had been taken. Nothing else was disturbed. Wallet still in the dish phone charger coiled on the table, keys on the hook, all untouched. Whoever had entered cared nothing for possessions or cash. They had wanted only objects tying Buddy to Claire. Daniel crouched and coaxed the pup out from beneath the chair. His voice steady, though his thoughts ran tight. Buddy resisted pressing himself into the corner, then slowly crawled forward and let Daniel lift him. The trembling body told the rest. Someone had been close enough for Buddy to sense close enough to leave fear behind like a scent. Daniel locked the door again, this time sliding the chain firmly into place, then walked the perimeter of the small apartment, testing each window latch, checking the back stairwell, and listening for sounds beyond the plaster walls. The night hummed with its usual noises, but his awareness had shifted. It was no longer an ordinary room, but ground to be secured. He set Buddy on the couch and lit the small lamp, the glow carving out a circle of safety. Then he sat, notebook in hand, and wrote down the plate fragment he had memorized, each letter pressed with deliberate force. He drew a line under it and added gray pickup lights off-shadowing. He circled it twice, then shut the book. His training told him patterns mattered, that what seemed isolated would connect. The footage at the church, the reports near the hardware store, the call that had gone nowhere, the scratch on his lock, the stolen printout, now the collar gone, all of it pointed to someone determined to erase Claire's trace while circling closer to him. He looked at Buddy, who had finally settled into the cushion, eyes drooping, though his body still shifted with small twitches. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He had once believed his service years were behind him, that the dangers were half a world away. Yet here in the quiet of his hometown, the rhythm of threat had returned not through missions or orders, but through a shivering dog left in his care. He felt the weight of decision pressing in. Either he ignored the encroaching line and hoped it receded, or he followed the threads and risked stepping deeper into whatever had swallowed Claire. As the clock ticked toward midnight, he placed Buddy near his bed again, the pup curling against the blanket. Daniel lay awake, listening to the building's creaks, the whisper of wind against glass, the muffled steps of neighbors coming home. Each sound etched itself sharper than usual. He understood he was now in someone's sights. They had entered once. They could return. The choice to confront or retreat was no longer abstract. It was already at his door. The next morning, Daniel called the advocate number again, this time leaving a message with sharper detail, naming himself, describing Buddy, and asking firmly for a callback. By noon, his phone buzzed with a withheld number, and a calm female voice introduced herself as Claire's assigned advocate. She spoke carefully, measuring what she could share, but Daniel pressed with patience rather than force. At length, she admitted that Claire had left a difficult relationship only weeks earlier, one marked by control and intimidation. The dog had been part of the leverage not through harm, but through threat, a way to make her comply. When Claire sought help, she was advised to keep Buddy hidden or surrendered, yet she could not bring herself to abandon him to strangers. The advocate suspected Claire had tried to keep Buddy safe by placing him where someone decent would find him. Daniel listened in silence, his fingers tracing the edge of his notebook, the weight of the words settling like stones. When the advocate added that Claire feared the men involved might use the pup as bait, not for mercy, but for pressure, Daniel felt his chest tighten. He thanked her for her candor and promised to protect Buddy until more could be learned. After the call, he sat long at the kitchen table, Buddy asleep on the rug at his feet, and realized the situation was larger than he had first believed. It was not random cruelty, but a pattern of coercion, and he had stepped into its wake. That afternoon, Daniel called Mark, asked if he could meet someone more connected to ongoing cases, and by evening they sat across from Detective Harris in a corner booth of a modest cafe. Harris was a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a steady composure, the kind who listened longer than he spoke. Daniel laid out the events plainly. The missing printout, the collar taken the truck with partial plate. Harris listened without interruption, then leaned back, rubbing a hand along his jaw. That gray pickup, Harris said, slowly shows up in files of interest. Not for one thing, but for a cluster. Catalytic converter thefts, mostly quick and lucrative. But more troubling are whispers about an unlicensed dog-fighting ring operating at a salvage yard west of town. The reports overlap. Same trucks, same men. It's not proof yet, but the patterns are clear. Daniel absorbed the information with the gravity of a man used to battlefield briefings. The mention of dogs tightened his grip on the edge of the table. Buddy stirred in his carrier beside him as if sensing the weight of the words. Harris continued. If Claire had ties to anyone in that orbit, it makes sense she'd fear for the pup. Dogfighting draws men who see animals as tools, not companions. Losing track of one would not sit lightly with them. He lowered his voice further. And if they mix that business with converter thefts, then they are not only violent but practical. They know how to hide in plain sight, move fast, and avoid long charges. Daniel leaned back, his mind aligning the puzzle. Claire's absence, the advocate's warning, the gray pickup circling her workplace, the deliberate theft of documents from his apartment. The threads converged at that salvage yard, a place he had driven past many times without looking twice. Now it loomed in his imagination as something darker. Mark shifted his old instinct to protect still alive beneath the badge. We can't storm in without grounds, he reminded. But we can watch. We can connect dots quietly. Daniel nodded, accepting the caution but feeling the pull of action. He understood that storms built gradually but broke quickly, and he did not want to be caught unaware when it came. He left the cafe with Buddy pressed against his chest, the night air crisp and filled with the hum of street lamps. Walking back to his truck, he looked at the pup and felt the weight of both promise and burden. We'll see this through, he whispered. At home, he reviewed his notes, adding Harris's words in careful lines. Salvage yard converters, dogfights. Each word sat heavy on the page. He underlined the plate fragment again, then closed the notebook with deliberate care. Buddy lay curled nearby, breathing evenly, unaware of the shadows closing around his small life. Daniel leaned against the window frame, watching the quiet street below, and understood that his role had shifted. He was no longer simply keeping a stray safe. He was holding a piece of a larger struggle, one that carried real risk. His training told him to prepare his conscience, told him to stay the course, and his heart told him the small creature at his feet deserved better than to be dragged back into fear. As he turned off the light, the darkness outside seemed less like absence and more like watchful silence. He knew the men tied to that pickup would not forget, and he knew the path ahead would demand choices he had not expected to face again. The next day, Daniel kept Buddy close, carrying him in a soft carrier when errands demanded it, unwilling to leave him in the apartment after what Detective Harris had revealed. The crisp evening found him at a gas station on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon and a row of vending machines humming beside the door. He filled his tank slowly, scanning the lot with the same measured awareness he had sharpened years before. The sound of gravel crunching drew his attention to a sedan pulling alongside the far pump. Two men stepped out, both in their 30s, their clothes plain, but their posture too direct to be casual. One leaned against the car, while the other walked toward Daniel, his expression fixed in a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Evening," the man said, voice low but clear. Daniel nodded without reply, his hand steady on the pump handle. The man tilted his head toward the carrier on Daniel's passenger seat. "That's your little dog?" he asked, pausing just long enough before adding, "Buddy, right?" The name fell with deliberate weight, and Daniel's shoulders tightened. He had never spoken the name aloud to anyone at the station. They knew it without his help. The second man approached, now circling slightly, his hands loose at his sides, but his eyes sharp. "Cute pup," he said, the words sounding more like a statement of possession than a compliment. Shame if he ended up in the wrong place. Daniel closed the fuel cap, his movements calm, his silence calculated. He opened the truck door and slid inside, the carrier buckled securely. The men watched, one raising his eyebrows as if expecting a protest, but Daniel only met his gaze once, long enough to communicate steadiness without challenge. Then he started the engine and pulled away, his eyes in the mirror, catching the faint nod they exchanged with each other. The drive home was longer than it should have been, each stop sign carrying the echo of their voices, each headlight behind him stirring unease. He parked finally on his block, carried Buddy upstairs, and checked the locks again. Sleep came in pieces that night, interrupted by the memory of strangers saying the puppy's name. Morning brought no relief. As Daniel pulled onto the road for work, the truck shuddered in a way he knew was not natural. He slowed, pulled into a quiet lot, and crouched beside the rear wheel. His eyes caught the small detail instantly, a nylon zip tie clipped so it dangled loosely from the axle, a sign he had seen in training reports about theft rings marking vehicles. It was not random wear, but a deliberate signal, a mark left to identify his truck for later. Anger and cold clarity mixed in his chest. He moved to the front, where a folded scrap of paper was wedged beneath the windshield wiper. He unfolded it carefully, his hands steady, despite the pulse in his throat. The message was written in thick black marker, each letter pressed hard into the page. "Return what's ours." The words lay heavy not only in threat, but in certainty. They believed Buddy belonged to them. Daniel folded the paper once more and placed it in his pocket, then removed the zip tie and crushed it in his hand. He drove the truck back with deliberate control, every turn reminding him he was being watched, every glance at the rearview mirror reinforcing that the quiet phase had ended. At home, Buddy greeted him with bright eyes and an eager tail, unaware of the shadow looming closer. Daniel lifted him, pressing the pup against his chest with a gentleness that belied the storm inside. He sat at the table, opened his notebook, and wrote the details in clear lines. 2 men at gas station knew, name, zip tie on axle, note on windshield. He underlined each point, then closed the book slowly. The escalation was no longer imagined, no longer hidden. They had revealed themselves. They wanted the dog, and they were willing to press him openly. Daniel looked out the window at the quiet street, his mind working through options. Calling Harris now would bring attention, but without more evidence it might only add scrutiny to Claire wherever she was. Yet doing nothing meant allowing the men to tighten their circle. He had lived through ambushes where hesitation was the deadliest mistake. The only certainty was that the line had shifted. It was no longer Daniel quietly protecting a stray. It was now a confrontation declared in ink and plastic, written across his daily routine. He lifted Buddy again, the pup licking his chin with innocent trust, and Daniel whispered, "They think you're theirs. They don't know better. We'll show them." The decision settled quietly but firmly in his chest. The time of shadows had passed. The fight was coming into the open. The following evening, Daniel decided to take Buddy back to the church lot, hoping that a familiar open space might calm both their nerves. The pup needed air and exercise, and Daniel wanted to test whether their routine could still exist under the growing shadow of threat. The sun had already dropped low, painting the sky in pale orange bands, and the lot was empty, its silence carrying an edge that made every step sound louder. Daniel unclipped the makeshift leash and let Buddy nose the damp grass. For a few minutes, the quiet felt manageable. Then the crunch of shoes on gravel reached his ears. He turned in time to see a man step from behind the fence, a length of chain coiled loosely in his hand. The man moved with a deliberate casualness, his eyes locked on Buddy, who froze in place. Before thought could overtake instinct, Daniel closed the distance in 3 long strides, placing himself between the man and the dog. The chain swung forward, but Daniel's hand shot up, knocking it aside. His stance carried the authority of a Marine who had faced worse odds. The man didn't push further. Instead, he grinned, the expression wide and knowing. "I know your building," he said, his voice low and certain. "Second floor corner unit." The words were not shouted, but delivered with the weight of a promise. Then he stepped back, still smiling, and melted into the shadows beyond the fence before Daniel could move after him. Daniel's breath steadied slowly, his pulse controlled by habit, though the chill in his stomach lingered. He bent and lifted Buddy, who trembled against his chest. The message was clear. They not only wanted the pup, but had studied Daniel's life closely enough to know where he lived. That knowledge cut deeper than the attempt itself. Back at the apartment, Daniel checked locks again and tried to calm Buddy with gentle words, but his own mind replayed the encounter. He realized the danger was no longer implied. It had walked into the same lot where children usually played and looked him in the eye. Later that night, a knock sounded on his door. He opened cautiously to find Kevin, the teenager who often kicked a ball around the church lot. The boy shifted on his feet, holding up a phone. "Mr. Hart," Kevin said nervously. "I thought you should see this." He tapped the screen, and a shaky video played. Kevin had been recording a casual trick shot when the gray pickup appeared in the background. The footage was brief, but steady enough to catch a clear frame of the rear plate as the truck slowed near the lot. The image showed more digits than Daniel had managed to memorize almost the complete sequence. But more telling was a close-up as the driver reached out of the window to tap ash from a cigarette. The camera caught his wrist, and there on the skin, dark against the pale light, was the outline of a spade tattoo. An ace of spades, stark and undeniable. Daniel felt the tightness in his chest shift to resolve. Evidence had finally taken form. Kevin lowered the phone, unsure if he had overstepped. "I figured since you had the dog, and those guys were hanging around." His voice trailed off. Daniel placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. Kevin's relief showed in the way his shoulders dropped, tension dissolving. "Just be careful, sir," he added before heading back down the hall. Alone again, Daniel sat at the table with his notebook, transcribing the plate numbers and sketching the spade symbol with careful strokes. He underlined it twice, then looked at Buddy sleeping uneasily on the blanket. The threats had moved from whispers to actions. First the truck in the shadows, then the men at the gas station, now the attempt with a chain in a place meant for children. Each step escalated. But now he had something to carry forward, a plate number, a symbol, a witness in the form of a video. It was no longer only his word against shadows. It was proof. He leaned back, letting the lamplight fall across the page, and felt the line inside him harden. He had given enough ground to fear. From this point on, he would draw the line himself. Daniel met Detective Harris 2 mornings later in a government building that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee brewed too long. Buddy stayed with Mark's wife in their safe backyard for the day, a precaution Daniel had agreed to, though his chest felt lighter only when the pup was near. Harris did not waste words. He spread the photos on the desk, the frame from the church camera. Kevin's video still of the tattoo, the partial plate Daniel had memorized, now matched with the state database. "We need eyes closer," Harris said. "We have suspicion, but not enough for a warrant. That salvage yard is a cover for more than stolen parts. I can't plant an officer without raising alarms. But you're already in their line." Daniel listened without interruption, his hands folded but steady. He knew what Harris was asking before the man said it outright. The detective leaned forward. "You served. You know discipline. If you agree, we can register you formally as a civilian collaborator. That way, if something breaks your presence, is documented and protected. You'll have one direct contact, Officer Reynolds. He's trustworthy, and he'll be your channel. No one else." The room held a silence where Daniel weighed duty against risk. He thought of Buddy trembling under the chair of Claire, leaving the pup in the lot of the man's grin when he said he knew Daniel's building. His decision settled with quiet inevitability. "I'll do it," Daniel said. Harris nodded once, not triumphant but respectful. He slid a paper across the desk and explained the terms. Daniel signed with deliberate care, understanding he had crossed from private citizen into something closer to service again. That evening he met Officer Reynolds, a man younger than him, but carrying the calm steadiness of someone who had seen enough to learn restraint. They shook hands firmly, and Reynolds handed him a small encrypted phone. "Use this only for updates," Reynolds said. "Keep your personal line clean. If you see anything, log it, call me and wait. Don't push alone." Daniel accepted the device and placed it in his jacket. It felt like the weight of an oath. Days passed before Daniel made his move. He studied his routines carefully, ensuring no tails followed, then drove out toward the salvage yard one evening as the sun sank. He parked half a mile away in a strip of abandoned lots where weeds grew through cracked asphalt, then walked the rest with the silence of old patrols. The air carried the metallic tang of rust and oil mixed with the faint smoke of burn barrels. From a ridge of broken concrete, he had a clear line of sight across the outer fence. The yard sprawled wide, littered with hulks of crushed cars stacked like tombs. Dogs barked faintly somewhere deeper inside, their voices muffled and irregular. Daniel crouched low, watching as dusk bled into full dark. Patience came easily. He remembered long nights in foreign sand, waiting for movement at the edge of scope. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then headlights approached from the highway and swung into the dirt road leading to the gate. A pickup rolled slowly, gray body dulled by dust, but recognizable even in dim light. The driver climbed out his jacket plain, but bearing the logo of Mason's Hardware. He moved with careless strength, tugging at the chain that held the gate. As he lifted it free, his sleeve slid back, revealing his wrist. In the last light of the evening, Daniel saw it clear, the Ace of Spades tattoo etched dark against the skin. The symbol from Kevin's video now marked in living motion. Daniel steadied his breath, noting the plate, the timing, the exact angle of his stance. He logged every detail as if briefing himself. The gate swung wide, the truck rumbled inside, and the man followed. Daniel stayed low until the gate clanged shut again, then withdrew carefully along his entry route, each step measured, each sound avoided. Back in his truck, he pulled the encrypted phone and typed a concise message to Reynolds' gray pickup. Salvage yard entry at 1943. Driver with spade tattoo. Jacket. Mason's Hardware. He hit send, then sat in the dim cabin. Buddy's absence beside him felt keen but necessary. He let the engine idle without headlights until his pulse slowed. The sky deepened to black. The salvage yard swallowed in shadow again, but Daniel carried the image with him, the proof not only of a link, but of a man's face and mark. As he turned the key and headed back toward town, he felt the road stretch ahead like the next stage of a mission. The decision to step forward had been made, and there would be no retreat. The night of the operation arrived colder than expected, the kind of chill that crept into bones even before midnight. Daniel sat behind the wheel of his old Ford, parked a short distance from the salvage yard, his eyes fixed on the glow of security lamps flickering beyond the chain-link fence. Buddy rested in a blanket on the passenger seat, ears twitching in his sleep, as though sensing the tension in the air. Daniel had already arranged for Mark to collect the pup in minutes, keeping him safe from what was to come. A buzz on the encrypted phone brought Daniel's attention to the plan. Reynolds' message was short, in position. Entry in 10. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket and exhaled. He was not law enforcement, not wearing a vest or carrying a badge, but his role was clear. He was to be eyes, and if needed, an obstacle. He repeated the words to himself as if they were a mission order. At 23:40, the first move began. Police cruisers, lights off, rolled into place along the dirt road. Figures in dark jackets advanced on foot, their radios clipped low, their voices controlled. Daniel turned the key and started his truck, headlights dark engine rumbling low. He eased forward, timing his approach as the gate clanged open from inside. A gray pickup roared suddenly to life, its engine louder and angrier than the night had yet held. The truck shot toward the opening gravel, spraying behind it, the driver leaning low over the wheel. Daniel recognized him instantly, the tattooed wrist gripping the column. He had no weapon to match force, but he had a vehicle and resolve. Daniel swung his Ford across the narrow exit, not fast, not reckless, but with enough precision to block the opening just as the gray pickup lunged forward. Tires screamed as the driver braked hard, the hood dipping metal rattling. For a heartbeat, both vehicles sat nose-to-nose, exhaust spilling like smoke between them. Daniel gripped the wheel eyes steady, his presence not aggressive but immovable. Behind flashlights burst into view. Shouts rang out, officers swarming the yard. The driver of the gray pickup cursed in frustration, threw his gear into reverse and spun away into the lot. He abandoned escape for chaos, weaving between stacks of wrecks, but the delay had done its work. Police had already breached, spreading through shadows with trained precision. Daniel backed his truck, slowly clearing the gate for them, then watched as lights and voices filled the yard. The sounds carried sharp commands, shouted dogs barking from deeper inside, metal clattering as men were pulled from hiding. Daniel parked outside the fence, stepped from his vehicle and leaned against the hood, his eyes never leaving the scene. Minutes stretched like hours, but eventually Harris approached his face, set in grim satisfaction. "We've got them," he said, then added quietly, "but it's not finished." Inside the yard, cages lined the shadows holding dogs of all sizes, their eyes wide and bodies trembling. Crates of catalytic converters lay stacked, tagged for resale, the proof of months of thefts. Among the clutter on a workbench, officers pulled free a stained apron embroidered with the logo of Mason's Hardware. Harris held it up to Daniel, his expression heavy. "Claire's," he confirmed. But there was no Claire. Questioning began on the spot. One of the younger men, shaken by the sudden collapse of his world, broke quickly. His words tumbled out in half-coherent fragments. He swore Claire had been seen weeks earlier refusing to comply, refusing to hand Buddy over. She had left the apron behind in her hurry. He claimed she was alive, hidden in a women's shelter across county lines, kept secret for her own safety. "She ditched the dog," the man said, voice shaking, "because she knew we'd use it to get her back." Daniel felt the words settle like a stone in his chest. The apron in Harris's hands proved her presence here. The cages proved the cruelty she had tried to escape, and the confession explained her decision. She had not abandoned Buddy lightly. She had done it to keep him from the men now in chains. Harris's voice was quiet but steady. "We'll confirm her location. If she's at that shelter, it means she's safe. For now. Daniel nodded, though his eyes lingered on the rows of trembling dogs being led out, each one a reminder of what Buddy could have become had fate not placed him in Daniel's arms. As dawn broke, officers loaded evidence into vans, their voices weary but resolved. Daniel returned to his truck where Buddy now slept again in Mark's care, curled with the innocence of an animal that did not yet know how close danger had come. Daniel touched the pup's head, gently whispering, "You're free of them now." But he knew the story was not complete. Claire remained a shadow on the edge of their lives, alive but distant, safe but unreachable. The night had delivered proof and arrests, but it had also left questions that would not rest until he saw her safe with his own eyes. The week after the raid, the town seemed quieter, though Daniel knew it was not silence born of peace, but of exhaustion after chaos. He kept Buddy close, walking him early in the morning before most neighbors stirred, watching the pup grow stronger, more curious, and more attached with each passing day. Yet Daniel knew there was unfinished business. One evening he received a call from Claire's advocate. Her voice was calm but warmer this time, almost relieved. She explained that Claire wanted to see him before she left town. The meeting would be held at the church office under quiet arrangements. No press, no crowd, just a room, a table, and signatures. On Saturday afternoon, Daniel walked across the lot with Buddy in his arms. The church bell had just rung, scattering its low notes over the rooftops. Inside the office smelled of old wood polish and faint candle wax. Claire sat, weighting her frame thinner than he remembered from the footage, her eyes tired but steady. When she saw Buddy, her lips trembled into a smile, one that carried both ache and relief. The pup wriggled as if recognizing something deep pressing toward her hand. Claire stroked him gently, then reached into her bag for a folder. The advocate guided them through papers, the legal steps of transferring ownership. Claire signed first, her hand pausing slightly before each stroke. Then Daniel signed, his handwriting firm. Claire looked up and spoke softly. "He's yours now, Daniel. I can't give him what he needs. I'm leaving to stay with my sister. It's safer that way." Her words carried no shame, only a quiet acceptance. She leaned close to Buddy and whispered, "Be good, Milo. Be happy." The name hung in the air, and for the first time, Daniel let it settle as truth. The meeting ended without ceremony. Claire walked out with the advocate at her side, and Daniel watched from the doorway as she disappeared down the street, her figure framed by sunlight. He felt no bitterness, only the weight of her trust left in his care. Days later, Harris called him into the station not to question, but to suggest. The detective spoke of a nonprofit, linking veterans with rescue dogs programs designed to train the animals as companions for men and women who carried invisible scars. "You already have the patience," Harris said. "And the pup has resilience. You'd both fit." Daniel thought long about it, remembering nights overseas when silence pressed too hard, when even the sound of another breath could steady him. He accepted. The program welcomed him, pairing him with other veterans who shared the weight of memories not often spoken aloud. Milo became both student and teacher, learning commands, sensing shifts in mood, offering presence where words failed. His energy steadied Daniel, and Daniel's steadiness gave the pup purpose. On Saturday mornings, Daniel brought Kevin along, the teenager who had once handed him the video proof. Kevin found meaning in small tasks, refilling water bowls, tossing balls for training, walking the dogs in pairs. He carried pride in helping his restlessness now channeled into care. The weeks shaped into rhythm. Daniel still lived with caution, still checked locks, but life expanded beyond fear. Milo grew into a companion who listened without judgment, a dog who carried joy into rooms that had been silent too long. Kevin grew into a young man with direction, learning discipline beside a veteran who had chosen to guide instead of retreat. One Sunday afternoon, the town returned to its simple rituals. Children gathered again on the church lot, their shouts echoing as soccer balls rolled across dirt still marked by rain. Daniel sat on the bench by the fence, the late sun warming his shoulders. The church bell began to ring slow and steady. Milo chased a brand new ball Kevin had brought, darting with joy, ears flopping, tail a banner of energy. The children laughed and let him join his small frame, weaving between them. Daniel watched his eyes soft his chest, easing in a way it had not in years. He saw not danger but ordinary life, the kind worth protecting, the kind worth staying for. Kevin sat beside him, Sneaker's muddy breath quick from running. "He's fast," the boy said, pride in his tone. Daniel nodded. "And he's home now." The words felt final yet freeing. He leaned back, letting the bell's echo carry over the lot, letting the laughter of children fill the space where silence had once weighed heavy. Milo bounded toward him with the ball, dropped it at his boots, and barked once, clear and bright. Daniel bent to rub his head, smiling with a peace that surprised him. For the first time since returning from service, for the first time since the night he found a trembling pup against a deflated ball, Daniel felt whole. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which moment struck you the most? Was it the first time Daniel found Milo, or the quiet ending when peace finally returned? Share your feelings in the comments and let me know where in the world you're watching from. And if you'd like more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Your support helps keep these stories alive.